Welcome back. If you didn't notice, we are not in the dorm anymore. The towel rack isn't in the back. We don't have the neon lights on the side of the wall. We are in my house. I moved back from college recently because they kicked us all out because that virus I can't say. I'm not going to get demonetized. I'm nowhere close to the requirements, but just to make sure I don't get shadow banned, I won't say it. Long story short, I'm home, but I'm not going anywhere. We're still here with content. We're still pumping it out. And today I have a few tips for the contenders out there. If you're in the playoffs, maybe got a first round bye. Maybe you don't have playoffs, but you're really close to getting that one seed and securing the W for the season. I have a few tips for you that I think could really help you out over this long haul, this end game. We've worked so hard for this. We have to do everything we can to get an advantage. I say we like I made the playoffs. I didn't. Worst year to date in fantasy. Absolutely slaughtered by the injury bug in one league. The other league, I just made a four. Actually, it's four matchups I could have won if I made a better lineup call. Shit happens sometimes. It is what it is. But nevertheless, here are the 7 tips I have for contenders moving forward to help you in your championship quest. First tip I have for you guys is don't overthink the waiver wire. Whether you have a fab system, waivers, or something where you can pick players up during games like I have in one of my leagues, I'm not sure why, but I rock with it. It helps sometimes during breakouts. Now is not the time to pick up people to slot into your starting lineup. That was week 4 and week 5. At this point of the season, going into the playoffs, the purpose of your bench, and by extension the wire, is to have competent enough backups and handcuffs to your better players, or even players that are good that you don't have up on your own team. Stack on guys like Alexander Madison, Tony Pollard, Latavius Murray, guys that if the person in front of them goes down, you're not only protected, but you also have a very valuable asset. I highlight running backs here because wide receiver handcuffs really aren't a thing. So at this point, you're just looking for running back handcuffs, whether they're for players you have or players you don't, stuck up on them. It's better to grab guys like these who you can start in case of emergency than stacking up on guys like James White, Larry Fitzgerald. Maybe they're not on the wire, but you get the point. These low upside, just guys that are never going to start regardless. If you're going to have them on your bench, you might as well grab guys who could potentially keep your league winning run alive if one of your players goes down. And at this point, your starting lineup is basically locked, aside from your flex. There's no point trying to pick up someone from a waiver and stick them in your lineup and try to get cute. I'll talk about that more later in about 3 or 4 other tips. It's something I think is really important because it's cost me multiple games this year, last year, and the year before. It's something I still struggle with, and I'm trying to make sure that you guys don't make the same mistakes that I did. Tip number 2, building off that whole don't pick up guys to play them the same week in the championship, is don't bench your studs. If you have a guy like Dalvin Cook and he's playing the Buccaneers in the semifinals, who are very good in fantasy against the running backs, you're not going to bench him for a guy like David Montgomery just because he plays the Texans. Dalvin Cook is your stud. He's your guy. Most likely you've ridden him to the playoffs to this point. You are never going to bench him, regardless of matchup, regardless of what other RB2 or flex play you have that has a better matchup. Cook is your stud. He's an RB1. Even if the matchup gets tough, you're rolling him out there. And in a similar vein, don't pick up a guy like Damian Harris, who has looked okay. He's looked fine. Decent RB2. Do not bench a guy like Cook for Damian Harris if the situation's the same. I'm not sure on Harris's exact matchup, but you get the premise at this point. Don't bench a stud just because another guy who's way worse at fantasy and football has a better matchup. I would much rather go out with my studs in my lineup and just accept a loss and say, you know what, I played my best players. It is what it is, not my year. Then try to get cute and start a guy like Montgomery over Cook and have Cook go off on my bench against a tough matchup. That I'll kick myself in the ass for. If I roll out my best guys and they just can't get the job done, it is what it is. Sometimes shit happens. So don't bench your studs trying to get too cute. Roll out your best players with confidence. Tip number 3 for me is that if you're going to stash a defense for all the weeks of the playoffs, do it correctly. If I asked you if you knew that the Seattle Seahawks, Jesus Christ, had the easiest schedule for fantasy defense in the playoffs, would you have known that? Probably not. But you definitely knew that they're on pace to be the worst defense in history. And if you didn't know that, you know that they're really bad because of how much myself and every single other analyst points them out as the matchup for pretty much any position on the field. In a similar vein to the last topic, you're not going to play a horrible defense because they have a very favorable matchup. Case in point, the Seahawks against the Giants. If you're going to try and hold on to a defense, there's about 3 combinations or characteristics that I'm looking for here. I'm looking for easy schedule, the quality of the defense, and home games. The first two are more important, but try and get a blend of all three, focusing on the first two. The last one isn't as important, but it's still nice to have. One team that I did a little bit of research on, just to give an example for this, is the Niners, who are starting to get a little bit healthy again on defense. They have two bottom four teams in points allowed to defenses, as well as the Rams. So you have two easier matchups, one good matchup. It's a solid enough defense with an easy enough schedule, and they have one home game. So it's not the best, but it's a sure enough option to have on your bench moving forward. Don't try and grab defenses that are terrible because they have easy matchups. Terrible defenses are going to be terrible regardless of who they play. Good defenses, solid defenses, decent defenses who have good schedules are the teams you want to be targeting. Here, tip 4 and 5, it's extended here. It's, if possible, go fuck your opponent. It's a very situational tip, but it's something that's still worth covering anyway. In a more obvious example of this, if your opponent has Aaron Rodgers starting and you have Davante Adams, obviously you're going to roll him out because, one, Davante's really good, but two, it also cancels out that Aaron Rodgers play a bit from your opponent. But this really benefits when it comes to more low-key matchups. Like, let's say your opponent's starting Tom Brady, and you're picking a flex between, like, Robert Woods and Chris Godwin. I'm not sure rest of schedule or, like, who they play exactly, but let's say that's the decision you have to make. If you're really torn between them, and, like, the factors such as opponent strength, player production, history against that matchup are tied, take into account who your quarterback is, who your opponent is playing at quarterback in this example. You might want to lean Godwin because in case Brady blows up, there's a very good chance Godwin has a great game as well. So it's not just him eating if Brady goes off, it's both of you. Obviously, it backfires a bit if Brady has a bad game in this example because Godwin might not have a great game, but that's the beauty of it. His quarterback is down. One of your flexes or receivers is down. It's not the biggest loss in the world. Part 2 and tip 5 in total of Fuck Your Opponent Part 2 has to do with your bench and what you can do with it if your opponent is really suffering at a certain position. Let's say quarterback. We'll go back to Tom Brady because he's the boy, even though it's in the Bucks, but forget about that. Let's say your opponent's only quarterback on their roster for some reason is Tom Brady, and Tom Brady gets hurt sometime during the week, during a game, whatever the case is. If you're playing this person, either the week of, the next week, whatever it is, go grab as many quarterbacks as humanly possible that are on the wire and stick them on your bench. Because this person has their only quarterback missing and they go to check the wire and you have every single quarterback that's good, there is a very high chance they go from playing someone like a Big Ben to a Baker Mayfield. It might seem a bit mean or unethical even to do this because you're really taking advantage of a mishap on their part, but no, it's not. You're here to win money and win a championship. You're not here to make friends and be nice to the person you're playing. If they're lacking at a position, smell blood in the water, go take advantage of it, and leave them with a much worse option at the position that they need. Tip number 6 on my list is one that I started to use a lot towards the second half of the season, and it actually brought me more success than I had in the first. I don't know if it's a psychological thing or whatever, but it seemed to be working for me, so I'll share it with you guys. It's don't overthink your lineup, set it and forget it as soon as possible. Obviously, barring injuries, that can lead to last-minute roster shakeups. That's a unique situation, but in this case, we're assuming everyone has a clean bill of health, everyone's good to go, all that jazz. Get your research in, look at matchups, figure out points against, all that type of thing early on in the week. I would really try and have my lineup sorted for the whole week by Thursday, no later than Friday. That way you have everyone in, you're confident in them, and you can just sleep on those picks until game time. The more time you leave yourself to think on your lineup, the more overthinking you do. And when you overthink things, it usually doesn't go well. You come up with weird scenarios or reasons that player A will do worse than player B. Even though player A is the guy you really want to start, you can talk yourself out of a very good lineup decision and make a poor one that could cost you a week and a spot at the championship. Try not to overthink things. Set your lineup early. Forget about it. Obviously readjust if things come up, but don't leave yourself room to overthink things. Just set it and forget it, and then whatever happens, happens. And tip number 7, it's a bit of a cop-out here, but just breathe and try to enjoy it. Obviously, the main goal of fantasy every year is to win. But having fun really shouldn't be forgotten in this equation. You've made it that far, whether in the playoffs, in the championship, or you won. Give yourself some time to breathe and enjoy it. Don't let fantasy take over your life like it has done to me for pretty much every week at this point. I mean, I started creating YouTube videos because I care about fantasy this much, but whatever, it's all right. If you're making the playoffs, if you're making the championship, you've earned the right to celebrate and enjoy just a little bit. as many times as you can try to make the right call based on numbers, analytics, statistics, all this stuff, sometimes things just don't go your way. The perfect matchup and the perfect spot can just not pan out just because. There might not need to be a reason. There's nothing you could have done better. It's okay Robert Woods only had like 8 points against the Seahawks. Everyone's going to start him because that's a great matchup. Don't get mad at yourself for benching him for someone like fucking Jakobi Meyers. Maybe not a real situation, but you get the point. Sometimes things just don't work out, and a lot of it is out of your control. And as much as we don't want to admit it, a lot of fantasy is luck. Not all of it. You can obviously do things to put yourself in a better situation, but don't stress about it because it's not all skill. It's also not all luck. It's somewhere in the middle. And there's only so much that you can control. So try not to worry too much. Sit back, enjoy you've made it. Obviously you want to win it all, but don't beat yourself up. Don't make it the end of the world if you lose. Shit happens sometimes. And that's going to be it for this video. I hope you enjoyed. I hope the new background isn't too distracting with the various paintings that my brothers made over the past 4 or 5 years. He didn't make that one, but it's still pretty cool. There's also a gnome in the corner there. Look at that. I'm getting good at pointing things in the background. But yeah, these are just some tips for the contenders out there. I think some of the most important ones are just all of them. Honestly, I think each and every one of these tips can help you in a certain situation. I think the one that could really give you a very strong tactical advantage is fuck your opponent part 2 by forcing the start like Joe Flacco at quarterback. But all of these have their own uses. All of these have their own purposes. And if you combine at least a few of them, there's a very good chance that they aid you in your quest for a championship. That's it for tonight. That's it for tonight. Peace.